3 terrifying true motel stay horror stories. Welcome back to Dark Whispers, where the shadows speak and the truth is far more terrifying than fiction. I'm your host, and tonight, we're checking into 3 motels that you'll pray never appear on your GPS route. You know that feeling when you're driving late at night, exhausted, desperate for a place to rest your head? That flickering vacancy sign feels like salvation. But what if I told you that for 3 people, their roadside refuge became a nightmare they barely escaped? Tonight, we have 3 true stories that will make you think twice before pulling into that dimly lit parking lot. From a business traveler who discovered what was really behind the walls of room 108, to a couple whose romantic getaway turned into a fight for survival, to a truck driver who learned why the night clerk never blinked. These aren't legends. These aren't creepypastas. These are real accounts from real people who lived to tell their stories. And before we begin, if you're enjoying this descent into darkness, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a whisper from the dark. And if you make it to the end of these stories, drop a comment telling me which one kept you up at night. Now turn off the lights, put in your headphones, and whatever you do, don't check out early. Story 1, The Walls Have Eyes. My name is Webb, and I'm a pharmaceutical sales representative. My job requires constant travel across the Midwest, bouncing between small towns that most people have never heard of. I've stayed in hundreds of motels over the past decade, the kind with peeling paint, questionable stains, and rates that won't get flagged by corporate accounting. I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. This happened in October of 2019, outside a town called Millbrook, Nebraska. Population 847. 1 stoplight. And 1 motel, the Sunset Motor Lodge. I'd driven 12 hours that day, chasing an appointment that got canceled while I was already on the road. By the time I reached Millbrook, it was past midnight, and I was fighting to keep my eyes open. The Sunset Motor Lodge looked exactly like every other budget motel I'd stayed in. Single-story, L-shaped building, parking lot with more cracks than asphalt, and that ubiquitous flickering neon sign promising vacancy. The office was barely larger than a closet, with wood paneling that belonged in a 1970s basement and a bell on the counter that had probably been rung by Richard Nixon. The clerk was a thin man in his 60s, with yellowed fingers and the kind of distant stare you see in people who've been doing the same job for too long. He didn't ask questions, didn't make small talk, just took my credit card and slid a key across the counter. An actual metal key, not a card. Room 108. Checkout's at 11, he said, his voice like sandpaper on wood. Is there breakfast? I asked. He just stared at me until I took the hint and left. Room 108 was at the far end of the building, naturally. Aren't the weird rooms always at the end? The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it for a good 30 seconds before the door finally opened with a groan that sounded almost human. The room was exactly what I expected. 2 double beds with comforters that had probably been white in the Carter administration, a TV that still had knobs, a bathroom with a rust-stained tub, and that particular smell that all cheap motels have, a combination of old cigarette smoke, industrial cleaner, and something else you can't quite identify but definitely don't want to. I was too exhausted to care. I threw my overnight bag on the chair, brushed my teeth, and collapsed onto the bed closest to the door. Within minutes, I was out. I don't know what time it was when I first heard it. Maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, a rhythmic scratching sound like fingernails on wood. But as I drifted closer to consciousness, I realized the sound was real. And it was coming from inside the wall. I sat up, trying to orient myself in the darkness. The scratching continued, steady and deliberate. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from the wall behind the headboard of the second bed. Mice, I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize it. Old building, rural area, probably had a rodent problem. I grabbed my phone to check the time, 2:47 a.m., and lay back down, determined to ignore it. But the scratching didn't stop, and the longer I listened, the less it sounded like mice. The pattern was too regular, too purposeful. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Pause. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Like someone was trying to communicate, or trying to get out. I turned on the lamp between the beds. The scratching stopped immediately. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the noise. I sat there for a full minute, listening to nothing but my own heartbeat. Then I turned off the light and lay back down. Within seconds, the scratching resumed. Now I was annoyed. I got out of bed and walked over to the wall, placing my palm against it. The scratching stopped again. The wall was cold, despite the heater rattling away beneath the window. I knocked on it firmly. "Knock it off," I said, feeling ridiculous for talking to a wall. No response. I waited a few more seconds, then returned to bed. Before I could even pull the covers over myself, the scratching came back, louder this time. More aggressive. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. There was a painting hanging on the wall between the two beds. One of those generic landscape prints that decorates every cheap motel room in America. But the painting was slightly crooked, tilted to the left. And as I stared at it in the dim light filtering through the curtains, I could swear it was moving. No, not moving. Vibrating. I got up and grabbed the frame, intending to straighten it. The moment my fingers touched it, I felt something warm on the other side of the canvas. Not hot, but distinctly warm. Body temperature warm. I pulled the painting away from the wall, and that's when I saw it. There was a hole in the wall behind the painting. Not a large hole, maybe the size of a golf ball, but perfectly circular, as if it had been deliberately drilled. And through that hole I could see light. Dim, flickering light like from a candle. My rational mind tried to explain it away. Maybe it was just a hole that led to another room and someone in that room had a light on. Maybe it was a utility access point. Maybe it was... An eye appeared in the hole. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the bed. A human eye, definitely human, was staring directly at me through that hole. It didn't blink. It didn't move. It just stared. "What the fuck?" I whispered. The eye disappeared and the scratching resumed with a vengeance. Now it was coming from multiple points along the wall, left, right, behind both beds. The painting I'd moved swung on its hook like a pendulum. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the wall. That's when I saw them. Dozens of tiny holes, all covered by the painting or hidden by the patterned wallpaper. Some were barely visible, others were obvious once you knew to look for them. And from several of them I could see light. Someone was watching. Someone had always been watching. I didn't pack. I didn't grab my things. I ran out of that room in my underwear and t-shirt, leaving the door wide open behind me. The parking lot was empty and silent, my car the only vehicle besides an old pickup truck parked near the office. I needed to get to my car, get my keys, get the hell out of there. But my keys were in my pants pocket, and my pants were in my overnight bag, and my overnight bag was in room 108. Fuck. I had no choice. I ran back to the room, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete. The door was still open, just as I'd left it. I darted inside, grabbed my bag, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps in the walls. Not scratching anymore, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving through the crawlspace behind the walls. They were heading toward my room. I found my pants, pulled them on without bothering with shoes, grabbed my keys and ran. As I reached my car, I glanced back at the motel. In the window of room 108, I could see the curtain moving, but I hadn't closed the door when I left. In the window of room 106, next to mine, I saw a figure. Just a silhouette, standing perfectly still, watching me. The office was dark, but through the window, I could see the clerk sitting at his desk, staring in my direction. He raised one hand in a slow wave. I burned rubber getting out of that parking lot. I drove for 2 hours straight before I felt safe enough to pull over at a 24-hour truck stop. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. When I finally worked up the courage to check my bag, I found something that still gives me nightmares. There was a Polaroid photo tucked into the side pocket. A photo that definitely hadn't been there when I packed. It showed room 108 from the inside, taken from somewhere up high, probably from one of those holes in the wall. The photo showed both beds clearly, and in one of them you could see a figure sleeping. Me. The photo showed me sleeping in that bed. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, was a message: "You never checked behind the bathroom mirror." I never went back to Millbrook. I filed a police report from 2 states away, but I never heard anything back. About 6 months later, curiosity got the better of me and I did some research. The Sunset Motor Lodge had been owned by the same family for 40 years. The current operator, Martin Reese, was the clerk I'd met. He'd inherited it from his father, who'd inherited it from his father. Martin Reese had been arrested 3 times for voyeurism, but never convicted. There were rumors in the town, whispers about previous guests who'd complained about feeling watched, about finding holes in the walls, about strange sounds at night. But nothing ever stuck. The motel was the only one for 50 miles, and in a town that small, you protect your own. I changed careers last year. I'm in inside sales now. No more traveling. No more motels. Because here's what keeps me up at night. I only found the hole behind the painting. I never checked behind the bathroom mirror, just like the note suggested. I never checked behind the headboard or the heating vent or any of the other dozen places someone could have been watching from. And that means somewhere out there in the crawl space of the Sunset Motor Lodge, there's more than just one photo of me. There's footage. Hours of footage. Of me sleeping, changing, showering, completely unaware that I was the evening's entertainment for whatever thing lives in those walls. The Sunset Motor Lodge is still open. It still has a 4-star rating on Google. And if you read the reviews carefully, really carefully, you'll find comments that mention thin walls, and feeling observed, and strange sounds at night. But you'll also find plenty of 5-star reviews praising the low rates and the authentic roadside experience. So if you're ever driving through Nebraska and you see a flickering neon sign promising vacancy, and you're tired enough to ignore the voice in your head telling you to keep driving, just remember to check the walls. Check every inch of them. Because if you don't, someone else will be checking on you. Story 2, Room 237. My name is Sarah Chin, and this is the story of how my anniversary trip became the worst night of my life. My husband David and I had been married for 5 years, and we'd been talking about taking a road trip for months. Nothing fancy, just the 2 of us, the open road, and whatever small towns we stumbled across. We both had high-stress jobs in Seattle, and the idea of unplugging for a week sounded like heaven. We set out on a Saturday morning in July 2021, heading east with no particular destination in mind. The first few days were perfect. We stayed in bed and breakfasts, explored antique shops in towns with populations of under 1,000, and ate at diners where everyone knew everyone. It was exactly the kind of low-key adventure we needed. On day 4 we made a mistake. We stayed too long at a state park, hiking a trail that was supposed to be 3 miles but turned out to be closer to 8. By the time we got back to our car, it was already getting dark, and we were still 2 hours from the city where we'd planned to spend the night. We could push through, David suggested, but I could see he was exhausted. We both were. That's when we saw it. About 20 miles down a dark highway, a motel sign appeared like a mirage. The Whispering Pines Motor Court. The sign looked relatively new, and through the trees, we could see a well-lit building. It looked clean. It looked safe. It looked like a good decision. We couldn't have been more wrong. The parking lot had a few cars scattered around, which felt reassuring. The office was bright and modern, nothing like the sketchy roadside places we'd been joking about all week. Behind the counter was a woman in her 40s, professionally dressed, with a name tag that read Janet. "Welcome to Whispering Pines," she said with a smile that seemed genuine. "Checking in?" "If you have availability," David replied. "We don't have a reservation." "No problem at all. I have several rooms available. Would you prefer smoking or non-smoking?" "Non-smoking, please." She typed something into her computer, then looked up with that same pleasant smile. "I have a lovely room on the 2nd floor. Room 237. It's actually one of our best rooms, renovated just last month. And since it's a Tuesday, I can give you our midweek discount." The room rate was surprisingly reasonable. We handed over our credit card and got 2 key cards in return. Everything felt normal. Everything felt fine. Room 237 was at the end of the 2nd floor hallway. As we walked down the corridor, David joked about Stephen King and The Shining. We laughed about it. We actually laughed. The room was nice. Really nice. Much nicer than we expected from a roadside motel. Modern furniture, a king-size bed with a pillow-top mattress, a flat-screen TV, a kitchenette with a mini fridge and microwave, and a bathroom with one of those rainfall shower heads. The walls were painted a soothing sage green, and there were actual artwork prints on the walls. Not the generic motel landscapes, but what looked like original pieces from local artists. "This is amazing," I said, dropping my bag on the luggage rack. "We should have gotten lost more often." We ordered pizza from a place Janet had recommended, took showers and settled in to watch a movie. Everything was perfect. Too perfect as it turned out. Around 11 we turned off the TV and got ready for bed. David was asleep within minutes. He's always been able to fall asleep anywhere. I'm the opposite. I need the right temperature, the right amount of darkness, the right pillow arrangement. So I lay there, scrolling through my phone, enjoying the comfortable bed and the quiet. That's when I heard the first knock. It was soft, barely audible. 3 gentle taps on the door. Knock, knock, knock. I looked at the clock, 11:43 p.m. I figured it was probably Janet from the front desk with something we'd forgotten, or maybe someone at the wrong room. I got up quietly, not wanting to wake David, and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I stood there for a moment, my eye pressed to the peephole, scanning what I could see of the corridor. Nothing. No one. I shrugged it off and went back to bed. 10 minutes later it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm, same volume. This time I was annoyed. I jumped out of bed and yanked the door open, ready to tell whoever was pranking us to fuck off. But again the hallway was empty. Completely empty. Not even enough time for someone to run away and hide. I stepped out into the corridor looking both ways. There were 6 rooms on this floor, 3 on each side. Ours was the last one on the right. All the other doors were closed and I couldn't hear any sounds from the other rooms. No TV, no conversation, nothing. "Hello?" I called out softly. No response. I went back inside and locked the door, engaging the deadbolt and the security latch. David was still sound asleep, snoring softly. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was the room next door. Maybe it was someone walking by and their bag hit our door. Maybe it was the building settling. Old buildings make noises, right? Except this wasn't an old building. Janet said it had been renovated last month. I was just starting to drift off when it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. Now I was pissed. I got up, ready to storm down to the front desk and complain, but David woke up first. "What's going on?" he asked groggily. "Someone keeps knocking on our door." "What? Who?" "I don't know. There's no one there when I look." He got up and checked the peephole himself, then opened the door. Same result, empty hallway. But this time something was different. There was a smell. Faint but distinct. Like flowers but not fresh flowers. More like flowers that had been sitting in water too long. The beginning of rot mixed with perfume. "That's weird," David said, closing the door. "Do you smell that?" I did. And it was getting stronger. We tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but the knocking continued. Every 10 to 15 minutes. Knock, knock, knock. Always the same rhythm. Always the same volume. Never louder, never softer, never more or less than 3 knocks. At 1:30 a.m., David called the front desk. Whispering Pines, "This is Janet, how can I help you?" "Hi, this is David Chin in room 237. Someone keeps knocking on our door." There was a pause. "Knocking on your door?" "Yes. Every 10 minutes or so. For the past couple of hours." Another pause, longer this time. I'm so sorry. Let me check the security cameras. Can you hold for just a moment?" We waited. I could hear typing, then murmured voices. Janet was talking to someone else. Finally, she came back on the line. "Mr. Chin, I've reviewed the footage from your hallway. There's no one outside your door. The hallway has been empty all night except for when you and Mrs. Chen looked outside." "That's impossible," David said. "We both heard it. We're both awake now and we keep hearing it. I understand and I apologize for the disturbance. Sometimes in older buildings, pipes can create sounds that seem like knocking. Or it could be temperature changes causing the walls to contract. You said this room was just renovated," I chimed in. "And this doesn't sound like pipes. It sounds exactly like someone knocking." "I really am sorry. Would you like to change rooms? I have another room available on the first floor." David and I looked at each other. The thought of packing everything up and moving at 2 in the morning was exhausting, but the knocking was making sleep impossible. "Actually, yes," David said. We'd like to change rooms. Of course. Come down to the office and I'll get you new keys. We threw our clothes back on and started gathering our things. As I was zipping up my toiletry bag, I heard something new. Not knocking this time. Scratching. Like fingernails on the other side of the door, scratching down the wood. David, are you hearing this? He froze. Yeah. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate. Then it stopped and we heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice. A woman's voice, barely above a whisper, coming from right outside our door. Please don't leave. We both stood paralyzed. The voice was strange, flat, emotionless, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Please don't leave. Please don't leave. Please don't leave. It repeated like a broken record, getting slightly louder with each repetition. David grabbed my hand. We're going. Now. He yanked open the door and we rushed out into the hallway. There was no one there. The voice stopped immediately. But the smell, that awful smell of rotting flowers, was overwhelming now. It filled the entire corridor. We ran down the stairs to the lobby. Janet was still at the desk, and her expression when she saw us made me realize something was very wrong. She looked scared. Not surprised or concerned, scared. We're checking out, David said firmly. Right now. Of course, Janet said quickly. I'll process your refund immediately. I'm so sorry about. What's in room 237? I demanded. What's really going on? Janet's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Bullshit. You know exactly what I mean. The knocking, the voice, the smell. What is it? She looked around the empty lobby, then leaned forward and lowered her voice. That room hasn't been rented in 2 years. I shouldn't have put you there. The computer system, it shouldn't have even shown it as available. I'm new here. I didn't know. What happened in that room? Janet shook her head. There was a woman. A guest. 2 years ago. She was found in that room. The police said it was suicide. But the staff, the people who worked here before, they said she'd been complaining for days about someone knocking on her door. About someone trying to get in. They thought she was just paranoid or on drugs. But after they found her what? Other guests started complaining about the same thing. The knocking. The voice. Always in room 237. The owner stopped renting it out. They renovated it, changed the carpets, painted the walls, replaced the door. But it didn't help. So they just stopped. Until tonight. Until the computer somehow showed it as available. You're saying the room is haunted, David said flatly. I'm saying people who stay in that room don't sleep. And the ones who do, they check out in the middle of the night. Just like you. She processed our refund and gave us a printout. We practically ran to our car. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I looked back at the motel. On the second floor, in the window of room 237, I saw a figure. A woman in a white dress, standing perfectly still, watching us leave. Then she raised her hand and waved. We drove through the night, too scared to stop until we reached a major city where we found a 24-hour Hilton. Even there, in a modern hotel with security and other guests, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every footstep in the hallway above us, every distant door closing, they all sounded like knocking. We ended our trip early and drove straight home the next day. David wanted to forget about it, to write it off as a weird experience and move on. But I couldn't. I had to know more. I spent weeks researching the Whispering Pines motor court. What I found made me wish I'd left it alone. The woman Janet mentioned was named Rebecca Hollis. She was a 34-year-old teacher from Portland who had stopped at the motel while driving to her sister's wedding. According to police reports, she called the front desk multiple times during the night, complaining about someone knocking on her door and trying to break in. Security cameras showed no one in the hallway. The next morning, a housekeeper found her dead in the bathtub. The official cause of death was ruled as suicide by drowning. She'd apparently held herself underwater until she lost consciousness. But here's the thing. Rebecca Hollis had scratches all over her arms and hands. Deep scratches that the coroner said appeared to be defensive wounds. Like she'd been fighting someone off. The police couldn't explain it. They theorized she'd been on drugs and had scratched herself in a psychotic episode, but the toxicology report came back clean. And Rebecca wasn't the first. I found newspaper archives going back 15 years. At least 4 other people had died at the Whispering Pines Motor Court. 1 in 2006, 2 in 2012, and 1 in 2015. All in different rooms. All ruled as suicides. All had previously complained about knocking sounds and feeling like they were being watched. I found a forum where former employees of the motel discussed their experiences. One user who claimed to have worked there for 3 years wrote, "Room 237 is the worst, but it's not the only one. The whole place is wrong. The land it's built on has always been wrong. Before the motel there was a hospital there. Before the hospital it was a sanatorium. Before that, the local tribe said it was a place where the dead got confused and forgot to leave. Some places are just bad. The Whispering Pines is one of them. We never went back. We never drove that route again." For a while, I checked the motel's website periodically, morbidly fascinated. Then one day last year the website was gone. I did some digging and found out the motel had closed permanently. The official reason given was structural issues requiring extensive repairs. But one of the local news articles mentioned that the closure came after 3 guests checked out in the middle of the night in the same week, all claiming they'd been terrorized by something in their rooms. The owner, faced with lawsuits and bad publicity, decided to shut it down. I'd like to say I've moved past it. That time has made the memory fade. But it hasn't. Because David and I aren't the same anymore. We don't take road trips. We don't stay in motels. And we don't talk about that night. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and David is asleep beside me, I hear it. 3 soft knocks coming from somewhere in the darkness. Knock, knock, knock. And I smell flowers. Not fresh flowers. Rotting flowers. I tell myself it's my imagination. That trauma creates phantom sounds. That the mind plays tricks. But then I remember that woman in the window raising her hand in that slow, deliberate wave. And I wonder if checking out was enough. Or if somehow, by spending just a few hours in room 237, we brought something home with us. Something that's still knocking. Still trying to get in. Still waiting for us to open the door. Story 3, The Night Clerk. My name is Thomas Rainey, and for 15 years, I made my living driving an 18-wheeler across the United States. I've seen every interstate, every truck stop, every forgotten town from Seattle to Miami. When you spend that much time on the road, you develop instincts. You learn to trust your gut about which routes to take, which places to avoid, which truck stops have the best coffee, and which ones you should drive past no matter how badly you need to use the bathroom. But on one night in March 2018, I ignored my instincts. And I almost didn't live to regret it. I was 3 days into a run from Chicago to Albuquerque when my whole schedule fell apart. An accident on I-80 had traffic backed up for hours. By the time I got moving again, my carefully planned schedule was shot to hell. Legally, I had to stop and rest. DOT regulations are strict about drive time, and I was pushing my limits. The problem was I was in the middle of nowhere. Western Kansas. Where there's nothing but wheat fields and wind turbines as far as you can see. The kind of empty that makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. I pulled off at an exit that barely deserved to be called a town. I'm not even sure it had a name. Just a gas station, a closed diner, and at the end of a gravel road, a motel. The Wayside Inn. 2 stories, maybe 20 rooms, and a parking lot with more potholes than pavement. The neon vacancy sign buzzed and flickered. Half the letters on the main sign were burned out, so it read, WYSN. Not promising. But it was either this or sleep in my truck, and after 11 hours behind the wheel, I wanted a real bed. The office was tiny and dimly lit. Behind the counter sat a young guy, couldn't have been more than 25, with pale skin and dark circles under his eyes. He was reading a paperback novel and didn't look up when I walked in. Need a room? I said. He slowly raised his head. That's when I got my first good look at his eyes. They were blue, but not a normal blue. Pale, washed-out blue like ice. And he stared at me without blinking. I don't mean he blinked infrequently. I mean he didn't blink at all. Just you? He asked. His voice was flat, monotone. Yeah, just me. Single for one night. He still hadn't blinked. I found myself counting the seconds. 10 seconds. 15, 20. Who doesn't blink for 20 seconds? He finally looked away, turning to the computer. That's when I noticed something else odd. There was no sound in the office except for the hum of the ancient air conditioner in the window. No music, no TV, no radio. Just that mechanical hum and the click of the keyboard. Room 214, he said, sliding a key across the counter. An actual metal key, not a key card. Second floor. Stairs at the end. Is there a vending machine? I asked. He stared at me again with those unblinking eyes. No. Ice machine? No. Okay. Checkout time? 11. That was the entire conversation. I paid cash, my company reimbursed my expenses, and headed out. As I reached the door, he spoke again. Mr. Rainey? I turned back. I hadn't told him my name. Try to stay quiet after midnight, he said. The other guests don't like noise. Sure thing, I said, though I hadn't seen any other vehicles in the parking lot. Room 214 was exactly what I expected from a $30 motel room. One double bed with a sagging mattress, a bathroom smaller than my truck's cab, a TV that probably didn't get cable, and that ubiquitous smell of old cigarettes and industrial cleaner. But I'd slept in worse. I tossed my bag on the chair, kicked off my boots, and lay down without even bothering to get under the covers. I set an alarm for 6 hours later and closed my eyes. Sleep came fast, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that comes from pure exhaustion. I don't know what woke me. It wasn't a sound exactly. More like the absence of sound. I opened my eyes and checked my phone, 12:04 a.m. I'd only been asleep for about 2 hours, but I felt wide awake. Too awake. That unnatural alertness you get when your body knows something is wrong even if your brain hasn't caught up yet. I lay there listening. The air conditioner had shut off at some point. There was no sound at all. No traffic from the highway. No wind. No distant trains or planes. Nothing. It was the kind of silence that feels oppressive, like you're underwater or in a vacuum. Then I heard the footsteps. They came from the hallway outside my room. Slow, steady footsteps. Someone walking past my door. I glanced at the crack beneath the door and saw shadows moving. Someone was definitely out there. The footsteps passed my door and continued down the hallway. Then they stopped. For about 30 seconds there was silence again. Then the footsteps started coming back. The same slow, measured pace. Back and forth, pacing outside my room. I got up and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but I could still hear the footsteps. Clear as day. Back and forth, back and forth. I opened the door a crack. The hallway was dim. Only every third light was on, but I could see the entire corridor. There was no one there. Yet the sound continued. Footsteps on carpet, clear and distinct, moving back and forth in front of my room. Hello? I called out. The footsteps stopped immediately. The silence rushed back like water filling a vacuum. I stood there for a full minute, waiting. Nothing happened. Finally, I closed the door, locked it, and went back to bed. I'd almost convinced myself I'd been dreaming or half asleep when I heard it again. Footsteps in the hallway. But this time they stopped directly in front of my door. And then came the knocking. Not a normal knock. A slow, rhythmic pounding. Boom, boom, boom. 3 heavy hits that made the door rattle in its frame. Who is it? I shouted. No answer. Just 3 more thunderous knocks. Boom, boom, boom. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the number for the front desk. It rang 6 times before someone picked up. Wayside Inn. It was the same clerk, same flat voice. This is room 214. Someone is pounding on my door. Silence on the other end. Hello? Did you hear me? I heard you. His voice was even more emotionless than before. There's no one in the hallway, Mr. Rainey. How do you know that? Can you see the second floor from the office? I don't need to see it. There are no other guests on the second floor. You're the only one up there. 3 more devastating knocks shook the door. I could feel them vibrate through the floor. I'm telling you, someone is out there, I insisted. Stay in your room, Mr. Rainey. Don't open the door. And please keep your voice down. The other guests need their rest. You just said I'm the only one up here. Click. He'd hung up. The knocking stopped. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart hammering, trying to make sense of what was happening. The other guest. He kept mentioning other guests, but the parking lot had been empty except for my truck. The clerk's story wasn't adding up. I decided to get the hell out of there. Company policy be damned. I'd drive through the night and sleep at a proper truck stop. I started throwing my things into my bag when I heard a new sound. Scratching. Multiple points of scratching all around the room. It was coming from inside the walls. Not mice. Too heavy, too deliberate. It sounded like human fingernails on drywall, coming from every direction at once. Behind the headboard, near the bathroom, along the exterior wall. Then the whispers started. I couldn't make out words, just a low murmuring that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Multiple voices overlapping, speaking in that same flat monotone as the night clerk. The temperature in the room dropped. I could see my breath forming in the air despite it being March in Kansas. The scratching grew louder, more frenzied. Whatever was in those walls was getting agitated. I could hear them moving through the crawl spaces, a sound like something dragging itself through narrow passages. I grabbed my bag and ran for the door. The moment my hand touched the handle, all the sounds stopped. Complete silence again. I yanked the door open and stumbled into the hallway. The lights were off now. All of them. The only illumination came from the red exit signs at either end of the corridor, casting everything in a hellish glow. And in that red light I could see them. People. Standing in the hallway. At least a dozen of them, spaced evenly along both sides of the corridor. They all wore clothes from different eras. I saw a woman in a 1950s dress, a man in a polyester suit from the 70s, a teenage girl in 90s grunge fashion. They stood perfectly still, all facing the walls, not moving, not speaking. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They didn't respond. Didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge my presence in any way. I started walking toward the stairs, moving slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. As I passed the first figure, the woman in the 50s dress, I glanced at her face. Her eyes were open, staring at the wall, but they were the same washed-out blue as the clerk's. And she wasn't blinking. I picked up my pace, moving faster down the hallway. None of them moved as I passed. They just stood there, frozen like mannequins. I was almost to the stairs when one of them spoke. "Don't leave." It was the man in the polyester suit. He didn't turn around, didn't move his head. Just spoke to the wall in that flat, dead voice. "You'll disturb the others." "I'm checking out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "No one checks out after midnight," another voice said. "The teenage girl. The clerk doesn't allow it." I didn't stop to argue. I bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind me, I heard movement, all of them turning in unison, their feet shuffling on the carpet. Then they started walking, all moving at the same slow, measured pace, following me down the stairs. I burst through the door into the lobby. The clerk was still behind the counter, still reading his book. He looked up at me with those unblinking ice blue eyes. "Checking out already, Mr. Rainey?" "Yeah, I'm leaving. Right now." He closed his book slowly and stood up. "It's past midnight. The rules are very clear. No checkouts after midnight. I don't give a shit about your rules. I'm leaving." The door to the stairwell opened behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know the others were there. I could feel them standing in a line, watching me with their dead eyes. "They don't like to be disturbed," the clerk said. "When people check out after midnight, they wake up. And when they wake up, they get confused. They forget they're dead." My blood turned to ice. "What?" "The Wayside Inn has been here for 60 years, Mr. Rainey. In that time, 47 people have died within these walls. Heart attacks, suicides, murders, accidents. Their bodies left, but they didn't. They stay here. They sleep during the day. But at night they wake up. They walk the halls. They remember being alive. And they don't like being reminded that they're not." I slowly turned around. The figures from upstairs were standing in a semicircle behind me. More of them now. I counted at least 20. All with those same pale blue eyes. All staring at me without blinking. "You can leave in the morning," the clerk continued. "After sunrise. They'll go back to sleep then. They always do. But if you leave now, if you run, they'll follow you. They'll think you're one of them. They'll want to know where you're going, why you can leave and they can't. One of the figures took a step forward, the woman in the 50s dress. When she spoke, her voice had an edge to it now, something almost like emotion breaking through the monotone. Where are you going? Another step forward, another voice. Why can you leave? I want to leave too, said a third voice. They were all moving now, slowly converging on me. I looked at the clerk, desperate. What do I do? Go back to your room. Lock the door. Don't make any noise. Don't answer if they knock. Wait until sunrise. They'll lose interest and go back to wherever they spend the daylight hours. And if I run? The clerk finally blinked. It was the first time I'd seen him do it, and somehow that was more unsettling than the constant staring. No one who's run has made it past the parking lot. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't fight my way through 20 dead people, and the clerk was blocking the front door. I turned and ran back up the stairs, the sound of shuffling feet following behind me. I reached room 214, fumbled with the key and threw myself inside, slamming the door and engaging every lock. The footsteps in the hallway grew louder. They were all coming up the stairs. I pressed my ear against the door and heard them gathering outside. Then the knocking started. Not just on my door, on every door in the hallway. Boom, boom, boom. A coordinated assault, all of them pounding in unison. I dragged the chair over and wedged it under the door handle. Then I pushed the bed against the door for good measure. The knocking continued. The scratching in the walls resumed. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Let us in. We just want to talk. We're lonely. We don't understand why we're here. Help us. Help us. Help us. The voices rose to a crescendo, no longer flat and monotone but desperate, anguished, angry. The door rattled in its frame. The wall shook. The light bulb in the ceiling fixture flickered and exploded, plunging the room into darkness. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, holding my phone like a talisman, watching the minutes tick by with agonizing slowness. 1 a.m. 1:30, 2 o'clock. The assault never stopped. They pounded and scratched and whispered and pleaded for hours. Then at 5:47 a.m. it stopped. All at once. Complete silence. I waited, not daring to move, barely breathing. At 6 o'clock, the first rays of sunlight started to seep through the edges of the curtains. I stood up slowly and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No figures, no shadows, nothing. Just a normal, shabby motel hallway in the early morning light. I moved the bed and the chair away from the door and opened it cautiously. The hallway was exactly as it had been when I first arrived, dim, dingy, but ordinary. I walked to the stairs, listening for any sound. Nothing. The lobby was empty. The clerk was gone. The paperback book he'd been reading lay open on the counter. I walked over and looked at it. It was a Bible, open to Ecclesiastes. Someone had highlighted a verse. The living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing. I left the key on the counter and walked out to my truck. The morning was cold and clear, with that particular quality of light that makes everything seem hyper-real. I climbed into my cab, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. I made it about 5 miles down the highway before I had to pull over. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't keep the wheel steady. I sat there on the shoulder, watching the sun come up over the wheat fields, trying to convince myself that I'd had some kind of breakdown. Exhaustion-induced hallucination. Carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater in the motel room. Anything rational. But when I got home 3 days later and unpacked my bag, I found something that proved it had been real. Tucked into my shaving kit was a Polaroid photo. It showed the second-floor hallway of the Wayside Inn, taken from inside one of the rooms. And in the hallway you could see all of them. The woman in the 50s dress, the man in the polyester suit, the teenage girl, and dozens of others. All standing in a line facing the camera. All with those pale, dead eyes. On the back of the photo, written in spidery handwriting, "Come back soon. We're always here." I quit long-haul trucking the next month. I told my wife I was tired of being on the road, that I wanted to be home more. I took a job with a local delivery company, home every night, no overnight stays, no motels. But I still think about that night. About the clerk's warning. about what he said would happen if I'd run. No one who's run has made it past the parking lot. I think about those 47 deaths over 60 years. How many of them were really accidents? How many were people who tried to check out after midnight? And I think about something else the clerk said. Something that keeps me up at night even now, years later. He said they forget they're dead. They wake up at night and walk the halls and remember being alive. But what happens when someone sees them? What happens when someone runs? They remember. They remember they're dead. They remember they can't leave. And they get angry at the living who can. I looked up the Wayside a few years ago, morbidly curious. It's still there, still operating. The website shows recent photos, the same shabby exterior, the same flickering neon sign. The reviews are mixed. Most people say it's exactly what you'd expect from a cheap roadside motel. But every once in a while, there's a review that mentions something strange. Sounds in the night. Feelings of being watched. Other guests who never seem to be there in the morning. One review, posted just 6 months ago, stuck with me. A truck driver, just like I used to be, wrote, "Stayed one night in room 214. Weird experience. Lots of knocking and strange noises. The night clerk was bizarre. Never blinked once the whole time I was checking in. Left before sunrise. Wouldn't stay there again for any amount of money." Room 214. The same room I'd stayed in. And the clerk, still there, still not blinking. Still watching over his charges, making sure no one disturbs them during their nightly wandering. I wanted to reach out to that truck driver to warn him. But warn him about what? That he'd gotten lucky? That if he'd stayed until after midnight, he might have become number 48? What good would that do? Instead, I posted my own review. Just a simple 1-star rating with a brief comment. Don't stay here. Trust me. 3 weeks later, I got a notification that someone had replied to my review. The username was night_clerk_1958. The message was short. "Thank you for following the rules, Mr. Rainey. We hope you'll visit us again someday. We're always here. Always waiting. Always watching." I deleted my account after that. Stopped looking at the website. Stopped thinking about it, or tried to anyway. But sometimes late at night, when I'm lying in bed in my own home with my wife sleeping beside me, I hear it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured footsteps. Back and forth, and I hear the knocking. Boom, boom, boom. And I hear the whispers. "Come back. We miss you. You're one of us now. You've seen us. You know we're here. You can never really leave." My wife says I'm having nightmares. She says it's PTSD from the years on the road, from too many nights in strange places. She's probably right. That's what I tell myself every morning when the sun comes up and the sounds fade away. But deep down, I know the truth. The clerk was wrong about one thing. He said if I waited until morning, they'd lose interest. He said they'd go back to wherever they spend the daylight hours. But they didn't lose interest. They followed me home. Not physically. I don't think they can leave the Wayside Inn, at least not in any way we'd recognize. But something came back with me that night. A connection. An awareness. I've seen them. I know they're there. And now they know I know. And the dead never forget. Closing. 3 stories. 3 motels. 3 people who checked in expecting nothing more than a place to rest their heads, and found something far worse waiting in the darkness. Marcus, who discovered the eyes in the walls. Sarah and David, who learned that some rooms should never be unlocked. And Thomas, who spent a night with the dead and barely escaped with his life. These are the stories they don't tell you when you're searching for cheap accommodations on the highway. These are the secrets that don't show up in online reviews. These are the truths that most people never live to share. So the next time you're driving late at night, exhausted and desperate for rest, and you see that flickering neon sign promising vacancy, remember these stories. Remember Marcus's Polaroid. Remember the knocking on Sarah's door. Remember the unblinking eyes of Thomas's night clerk. Maybe that extra hour of driving isn't so bad after all. Maybe sleeping in your car doesn't sound quite so uncomfortable anymore. Maybe that expensive hotel chain a few more miles down the road is worth the money. Because some prices are too high to pay. And some checkouts aren't guaranteed. If you made it to the end of these stories, thank you for listening. Drop a comment below and let me know. Which story disturbed you the most? Have you ever had a strange experience at a roadside motel? Share your story. We're all in the darkness together. And if you want more terrifying true stories, make sure you're subscribed to Dark Whispers with notifications turned on. We post new nightmares every week. Check out the playlist in the description for more motel horror stories, or dive into our series on haunted highways. Until next time, stay safe out there. Watch where you sleep. And remember, always check behind the bathroom mirror. This has been Dark Whispers. Sweet dreams.